Hello, my name is Tara Brabazon and I'm the Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University, and welcome to vlog 183. How to know it's time to quit a PhD. Multiple requests for this one, and the research that I've deployed to construct and configure and frame this vlog is quite disturbing. The research is very mixed on this and often pretty disturbing, so I've tried to shape this up into something that may be meaningful to you. But we're going to start the vlog this week with a fact and then an intellectual exercise. So join with me on this journey. So let's start with the fact, shall we? The intellectual ability of students who graduate from a PhD and those who leave the program before examination and graduation, the intellectual ability of those two groups is the same. Now, why that matters is former supervisors, advisors and students always use the mantra when they leave the program early, when they attrit, that, oh look, intellectually I just couldn't do it. Just so you know, that's nonsense. The students that finish and the students that leave early have the identical intellectual ability. Okay, so that means therefore the reason students leave is a different reason. So that leads us into our emotional exercise. Let's do this. Now, in an office such as mine, the Office of Graduate Research at Flinders University, but these offices exist around the world, we see students on the best day of their lives and, yes, the worst day of their lives. And I have students that ask me on a daily basis, should I quit my PhD? And instead of giving platitudes or gossip or rumour or just sort of some nice words, or how are you feeling, I actually have constructed an exercise that I use to see how the students are travelling, and if indeed they're right, they should quit the program. So do this exercise with me. Are you ready? Okay. So what I get the students to do is look at me and say, right, I want you to really be conscious of the emotions that you're going through once I ask you this question and I present this scenario to you. And this is the scenario, so do it with me, okay? I'm taking your PhD away from you now. I'm taking your PhD away from you now. Now breathe into that for me and tell me how you feel. Now, the students that in response to that scenario feel relieved, so they go through that and they go, oh, you've taken it off me, I'm just relieved. Team, if you're relieved, if relief is the emotion, then time to leave the program, not a doubt. I wish you well. Enjoy the rest of your life. So if you felt relief, then really press end on this vlog and thanks for playing rock and roll. Have a great life. Students often, though, in my office are teary. They're angry, they're bereft, they're feeling a bit confused, pretty complicated emotions. So if you're in that group, if you're upset at the idea of someone taking your PhD away from you, then the chances are perhaps you should stay, but I'm going to make you work for it a bit today. So we're going to go through a series of further explorations with regard to the research to see if it might be time to call time. So let's drill down and see what the research tells us about success in the doctoral program, knowing, team, that staying in a PhD or leaving a PhD program has nothing to do with your intelligence level. Right? That's our fact. Nothing to do with your intelligence. It's about something else. Let's explore that something else. So firstly, gain some perspective. A PhD is just a PhD. It's a qualification. It's not cancer. It's not global warming. It's not the drought in regional Australia. It's a qualification. And as I've often said, you are not your PhD. Your identity must never be a qualification. So please put that qualification into perspective for me. If the thesis is torturing you on a daily basis, then really you need to take a step back, reframe, and gain some perspective. But, there's always a but, and my but is number 2. Do you need a PhD to enable your future career? And can I say, this was the bit when I was doing the research for this vlog and I was reading blogs on this matter. I think the students were very flippant, the former students were very flippant, and they were sort of asking questions that I just wanted to help them desperately, because there were some quite naive understandings of the workplace, I would argue, in some of those blogs. But therefore, 2, do you need the PhD to enable your future career? And let's get real on this. This is an important question, a crucial question. But also, while I'm staunch and always remind people that a PhD is just a qualification, and if you're going to finish it, it's just a qualification, but you need to grasp that if there's any idea in your mind that you might end up working in a university, then you need to finish this qualification. You're going to need it. And I'm being honest with you, I'm interviewing every 2 or 3 weeks at the moment, either as an external for another university or for Flinders, and I need to be really honest with you. I don't shortlist people without a PhD. I don't shortlist people without a PhD for the most junior of jobs. We had a recent job where 94 people applied, 88 of them had a PhD. So if you think you're remotely ever going to work in a university from the lowest of jobs without a PhD, you won't even be shortlisted, okay? So getting a PhD remains important, as it is the foundation for an academic career. And also remember the truth that most PhD students do not end up working in universities these days. So, the majority of our students leave universities and work elsewhere, and that's great. But if you are interested in working in a university, then you are going to need a PhD. Okay, so therefore we need to change the frame around the PhD that you are doing. Don't make it your life's work. It's the worst research you'll ever conduct, not your best. Treat it like a job and therefore finish it. So the PhD sometimes makes you unhappy. Work isn't always pleasant. Work mostly isn't pleasant. That's why it's work. That's why you have to be paid for it. So make sure you've got some perspective on it. Yeah, it's hard, but just get through it. It's a matter of, and this is the best advice I can give to anybody wanting to get through a PhD, is, there are moments, perhaps years of it, where you've just got to grunt through it. It's not pleasant, and just finish it to achieve a career goal. Just do that for me and understand clearly why you're doing it. I'm doing this not for the great and the good. I'm doing this to get the qualification to enable the next stage of my career. So therefore, it's about expectations management. If you thought when you started, I'm enrolled in a PhD to chase rainbows and ride unicorns, then your expectations were wrong at the start. Recalibrate your expectations, understand what's required, deliver what's required. Thanks for playing. 3, important one. Are you too emotionally invested in your PhD? Getting your feelings hurt is not a reason to leave a PhD. Okay, so your supervisor or fellow students, your peers, might ignore you, might be a bit flippant or a bit short with you. Okay, not a reason to quit a PhD. Life is dreadful most of the time, and a PhD is part of life. So if you need it for a job, treat it like a job. Don't expect it to be a love affair. You have a responsibility, so finish it. Australian taxpayers have funded the fees. Even if you're not on a scholarship, they've funded the fees for you to do this. That is such a privilege, so assume that responsibility, finish it. But you're going to have to change something. So change how you're thinking, change your expectations, change your mindset, sharpen the project, and yes, maybe change your supervisory team. Now, I'm not justifying bad behaviour here. Go hard if someone is activating racism, sexism, ageism, homophobia. That stuff's illegal. It's also a contravention of the bulk of institutional policies. So, that's a separate issue. But, if you're just sort of a bit unsettled and people are just sort of ignoring you a bit and not treating you properly, That's life. So don't quit, but change what you can change. And what you can change is your expectations. Don't romanticize the doctorate, please. Don't romanticize academic life. Don't romanticize the workplace. We live in ruthless, tough, nasty, ego-driven, backbiting times. They're our times. And of course the PhD is part of those times. Remember when Charles Darwin, and Darwin is used all the time in the cliche survival of the fittest, it's used all the time, but that survival was not of people that do CrossFit. It was the survival of the species that could adapt. And while Darwin is used in all sort of really problematic political contexts these days, what I would say to you is there's something valuable in thinking about adaptation. Can you adapt? If you had a narrative about what your life would be like, and the PhD is cutting across and not fitting into that narrative, then you know what? Maybe change the narrative, change the story. The PhD does not exist to make you happy. The PhD is a bridge that moves you from one space, one time, one moment of your life to the next. 4, important one, do not fixate on the end point. Now I know I always say begin with the end in mind. The challenge of that particular way of thinking about a PhD is it's a long gig, right? It's 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, depending what country you're in. I'm aware of that. In the Australian system, British system, Kiwi system, 3 years. So it's important when you're 3 months in or 6 months in or 18 months in that you're not judging it by the final stage because you don't know enough yet. So judging it by the end point obviously will make you anxious and worried. So don't judge yourself on the way through by the standards of a finished thesis. And that's one of the reasons I'm such a big believer in milestones through a PhD. So a student is assessing their progress on the way through on its own terms. So you're 6 months in, thanks for playing. Let's assess 6 months in and see how we're going. Now, Oasis named one of their great albums. People didn't like this album. I love this album. Be Here Now. Be Here Now. And I've always really used that as a maxim of my entire life. Be here now. Be in the present of your PhD now. Judge the now. Not where you think you should be, not the end point. If you're 6 months in, judge it at 6 months. If you're a year in, judge it as at a year, not like it's about to be examined. Judge it at a milestone. 5, be aware that the midpoint is a danger point. So wherever you are, whatever international system you're in, the middle of that system, problematic. So in the Australian system, that's 18 months in, and that's when students leave. So one of the reasons we run a mid-candidature intensive, so a couple of days where everyone comes in mid-candidature, and one of the reasons that session firstly is held, and secondly it's so volatile, people cry, people scream, people slam doors, it's a really out there kind of experience, it's wild. And the reason it's like that is because it is the crisis point for just about every student. You're feeling shaky at that point. So if you're midway through and you're watching this and you're going, I'm really shaky, I don't know if I can do this, the first thing I need to say to you is that's completely normal. That's completely normal and completely understandable. You've suffered a lot to get to this midpoint and you can't actually see the end. So there's a fair amount of work to go. So at that point, obviously you're going, can I keep doing this? Completely normal response. So firstly, know that this is a node or a point of anxiety for everybody. And what you have to do really is check that the fundamentals are right. Check that everything is sort of where it needs to be at this point. So you're working towards milestones. Are you where you need to be at this point? Are you ticking the boxes? Is everything cool? Your supervisor cool? Great. Are your expectations clear? So you know why you're doing it and where it's going to take you? Great. And also, most importantly, manage your emotions. So ensure there is a separation of your emotional life and the PhD. Do the PhD, don't render it such an emotional event. It's an intellectual event. So take a breath, get the fundamentals right, and keep going. 6, you lose motivation. Now, for some students, this is a really serious point, and I never underestimate motivation. You know, I make my students come up with 10 motivations before they even start. So why are you doing this? I need 10 to start, or else you probably haven't got the energy to start the party off. But can I say, motivations are not enough. They're not enough to get you through the dark night of a PhD. They're the fuel for the first year, but you're going to need something else. So if this is you now, so you've lost interest in the research, you're finding no real reason to get up in the morning, you've basically checked out of the research, you're sort of enrolled in your head, but you're not really enrolled, and the PhD is not something that you're thinking about and interested in every single day. If that's you, then probably it is time to leave. Because actually, when people talk about motivation, motivation is like an empty bucket. What are you meaning? What do you mean you've lost motivation? Call it what it is. Have you lost interest? Have you lost commitment? Have you lost focus? So call it what it is. 7, recognize that supervision may be only part of the problem. Now, when in doubt, students will always blame supervisors for all their problems. When in doubt, blame the supervisor. Can I say, you know, when I train supervisors, when in doubt, the supervisors blame the student. So isn't this going well? Blame, shame, guilt. Oh, loving it. That's terrific. And the trouble is, when students blame supervisors or supervisors blame students, it's very difficult to intervene in that and create help. And that's why I think every now and again I do have to remind students about that old cliche. I wish it wasn't true, but it sort of is. You know, when people say to you, including your supervisor, dude, it's your thesis. And there's a reason why supervisors say that, because, dude, it is your thesis. I've already done my thesis. How many bloody years ago? 30 years ago. Did my thesis, dude. It's over. I've done mine. And, you know, I had pretty dreadful supervision too, but you just get on with it because it is your thesis. You own it. It's yours. Your name's on it. And also remember, compared to when all of us, your supervisors, did our PhDs, life is much more difficult for academics now. Academics are working 60, 70, 80 hours a week. That's relatively normal. Academics have always worked these long weeks. But the difference now is most of us are probably, you know, a couple of weeks away from having to think about, do I need another job? Because it's a very volatile higher education sector at the moment. So whereas our supervisors were very, very stable in their employment, your supervisors have a lot to worry about in a very unstable university sector. So yes, absolutely, your supervisor may not be helping you, but blaming your supervisor may also be blocking you from understanding what's going on with clarity. Yes, absolutely, change your supervisor. 40% of students do. But recognize that you need to sort yourself out before you change supervisors and before you go to the new supervisor. So why are you doing the thesis? What is your commitment? Are you dogged? What are your expectations? Now, I've seen so often students move from one supervisor to the other, they haven't sorted themselves out, and the same problems appear. Okay, so do check if you're using the supervisor as an excuse for your issues. Now, okay, change your supervisors, lots of people do, but unless you've done your interior homework, the same problems are going to appear. Okay, 8. This is a big one, and the literature was really quite complicated on this, and this matters. 8. Is your project sound? One of the reasons I've been such a believer, I mean, the Australian system has a lot that's problematic in it internationally, but one of the areas I think we are leading the world is this early moment, this early milestone for a confirmation of candidature. Now, in the UK system, it's right near the end, but the confirmation of candidature in Australia is between 6 and 12 months. and why I'm such a believer in that, is we can intervene in a bad situation nice and early. The literature shows that one of the reasons why students leave the PhD at that midpoint is because the project isn't working. The research questions or the topic or the scope and the scale, none of it's really happening. So it's a project generated problem and you're out. And they go particularly, of course, in qual-quant empirical studies. Now, I would argue 18 months in, halfway through, too late. These issues with the project should be picked up much earlier. And if they're not halfway through, then wow, the project is in some difficulty and yeah, you may not be able to finish. So candidates do leave the PhD if their project just isn't cutting it. So the research questions are not really in place, the theoretical material's not working, the methods are a bit wonky, or indeed they've done the first set of data collection and it just doesn't work. The data's not really functional, okay? So if there is a problem in your thesis that's not picked up early, then that's really another reason why you need to leave a PhD. Now, a really good supervisor, and I mean really good, these are really rare, these are unicorn supervisors, can take a problematic data set or some difficulties and halfway through recut it to render it whole and create a PhD. Very specialist expertise that, and very difficult to do. Much easier earlier on to go, oh look, you need to sharpen your research questions, tighten this up. So make sure as early as you can, what are your research questions? What's the literature? What theoretical perspective are you using? Keep it tight, keep it sharp. Tight, sharp PhDs finish. Woolly, baggy, ill-focused doctorates don't. 9. Take a leave of absence first. Now this one made me a bit aggressive mentioning it because, you know, I don't like sort of the suspensions, the intermissions, the leave of absence, because I often think students use it rather than addressing the problem. Like, address the issue, don't sort of kick it to touch, right? Don't just go, oh, it's all a bit too much, I'll go on intermission. What's the problem? Address the problem, then the problem is solved. But in the case of when you're thinking of actually leaving a PhD program, then and you're just not quite sure, you want that final confirmation, then you know what? Absolutely. Take 6 weeks leave of absence to make sure your decision is accurate. Big fan of that. And look, if you're away for 6 weeks and you feel better being away from it, your decision's been made, leave the program. If, however, while you're away for that 6 weeks, you missed it, you missed the project, you missed the people, you missed the commitment, you missed the intrigue and the interest and the focus of research, then you can come back with those renewed expectations and finish. 10. Oh yeah, talk with people. If you're thinking of quitting a PhD, what's happening is in your head, you're having conversations with yourself in a loop, aren't you? And those conversations are not terribly productive. I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, this project's really messed up, my supervisor hates me. So you have about 5 or 6 little looped conversations with yourself that make you feel pretty terrible most of the time. So the way you get out of that loop is express those thoughts to your supervisor or somebody like me, like a dean, okay? We're used to that. And so we find ways to get you out of that looped conversation and provide solutions and evidence to show that it's actually not the case. So we can discuss the PhD and reframe those expectations around it. But also, please use counsellors. Most universities these days, including Flinders University, have short-term programs of about 6 weeks of talk therapy, specialist counsellors that we work obsessively with our PhD students with sort of 6 weeks. So it's a finite project. What's the issue you want to solve in your PhD? And the counsellors are geared to help you with that resolution in 6 weeks or less. So that is great. Use the professionals. Gain that emotional perspective on what's going on. But also, importantly, use your family, use your friends, use your spouse. Talk about it. Share it. It takes a family to do a PhD, a friendship group to do a PhD. Talk about it with those people so you're not just having that conversation with yourself. Also, and I hate the word well-being, but I'm going to use it, work on your well-being. And what I mean by well-being is, are you exercising? Are you eating properly? Team, this happened last week actually with one of our students at Flinders. If you're on 3 Cokes and 4 Mars bars a day, you're probably not going to feel too good about yourself. If you're actually never seeing the sun, and remember I know something about that, if you're never seeing the sun, then no wonder you're feeling a bit bad about yourself. Okay, so at that point, polish back to your life, to the fundamentals. Are you eating properly? Are you hydrating properly? Are you staying off the booze as much as possible, because that's just going to make everything worse? Are you exercising? Are you going for a walk in the sunlight? Okay. Now, the key is, don't live in that decision of quitting the PhD on your own. Please don't do that. Talk about it. Gain alternative perspectives. Ask for honest feedback. And that'll give you a sense of a community around you to help you make that big decision. And look, it is a big decision. I'm not prettying this up at all. And I think one of my issues when I was reading all the blogs on this is the students were a bit flippant. And I'm thinking, yeah, don't be, because it is a life-altering decision. It is a life-altering decision. Your life could improve, but don't pretend, oh look, it's just a degree and I'll just get out of it. It is a decision that'll change the course of your life. So do that with your eyes open. Think about your past, think about your future, but most importantly, remember our oasis. Be here now. Be here now. What are your motivations in the present? What are your expectations in the present? Are you blaming others? Is that a legitimate blame? Change supervisors if you must, but remember, the problems will keep coming back to you if the problem is you. If you need to solve your problems, don't displace it onto others. Look in the mirror. But again, importantly, gain those alternative views on your decision. You are not alone. Get professional help and advice. Make a professional decision, not an emotional decision. Quitting a PhD is no shame, no blame, no guilt, no embarrassment, and in fact, nobody else's business but yours. And remember, it's saying nothing about your intellectual ability. But what I'm asking you to do in this vlog today is do your homework on this matter. You have to work out if the bad day, the bad week, the bad month, the bad year is just simply a pothole, a bit of a bump in the road, or in fact it is the end of the road. Do remember my old line, beginnings matter, but endings matter more. So wherever your ending for your PhD may be, on the way through or via graduation, make that ending matter. I wish you love, light and peace. Tea out.